It was late at night when Amina gave birth. She was only 22, her face pale but glowing with quiet strength. In her arms lay not one, but two tiny newborns, their cries filling the small wooden house. The midwife whispered in disbelief. Neighbors who came to help stood frozen. Her husband, Rashid, lingered by the doorway. His eyes were restless, darting between his wife and the babies. He did not share her smile, nor the awe of those around. Instead, his jaw clenched, his shoulders stiff. He muttered something no one understood, then stepped outside into the night air. Amina pressed her lips to her children's foreheads, whispering a prayer. She felt joy, but also a sudden emptiness, as if she already knew the man she married would not walk back inside. That night was the beginning of her greatest trial, and her greatest blessing. Days passed, then months. With each new season, Amina's family grew. By the time her neighbors counted, she had given birth to 4 sets of twins. Her home was filled with the cries and laughter of babies, yet silent in another way. Rashid had not returned. At night, Amina would sit near the open doorway, watching the path outside. She hoped to see a figure, a shadow, a sign of the man she once trusted. But only the wind moved, carrying dust across the empty road. She learned to cradle 2 children while cooking, to sing lullabies while her eyes fought sleep, and to keep her spirit strong though her body felt weak. Some called her cursed, others called her blessed. Amina listened to neither. She looked only at her children's faces, and in their eyes she found the strength to keep going. The years moved slowly, each one marked by another pair of twins. By the time Amina's eldest children could run barefoot across the dusty ground, her arms were still full of newborns. She carried them wherever she went, even as villagers stared. Whispers followed her steps. 17 pairs of twins, they said, shaking their heads. It is too much for one woman. Some offered her food or cloth, others turned away in silence. Amina kept her chin high. She taught her children not to bow their heads when people judged them. "We are many," she told them softly, "but each of you is a blessing." Her words sank deep into their hearts, even when they were too young to understand. In the glow of the setting sun, Amina's children gathered around her like branches of a single tree. She stood tall, though her body was weary. Alone, she carried a burden that should have broken her. Yet she endured. When the village slept, Amina's nights remained awake. By the light of a single candle, she mended tiny shirts and stitched worn blankets. Around her, her children slept soundly, their soft breathing filling the room. They always clung to one another, never alone, always paired like they were born. Amina paused often to watch them. She counted each rise and fall of their small chests, and her heart grew heavy with both love and fear. 17 pairs of twins meant 34 lives tied to hers alone. She asked herself quietly if she could give them all the care they deserved. But when the youngest stirred in sleep, reaching out for comfort, Amina was there. She laid a gentle hand on their forehead and whispered, "I will not fail you." Her voice was steady, though her body trembled from exhaustion. To her children, she was both mother and father, guide and protector, carrying the weight of an absent man's choice. As years went on, Amina's children began to grow into her helpers. At the village well, her eldest twins carried buckets of water, their small arms straining but proud. The younger ones played nearby, chasing each other's shadows, their laughter ringing through the air. Amina smiled as she pulled the rope, her hands strong and calloused. For every load she carried twice as much in her heart. Some villagers no longer whispered cruelly. Instead, they watched with quiet respect. Though some still shook their heads, others began to admire her strength. Her children learned. Quickly, they knew hunger and hard work, but they also knew togetherness. No one ever felt alone, for there was always a twin beside them, a mirror of their struggles and joys. By the well, under the bright sun, Amina saw the fruit of her labor. She was raising not just children, but a family rooted in loyalty and resilience. Amina believed knowledge was as important as bread. She gathered her older twins each evening, giving them slates to write upon. They practiced letters and numbers, their voices repeating words in unison like a song. While they studied, Amina fed the younger ones, guiding spoons carefully to tiny mouths. The room was crowded, mats spread across the floor, but it was alive with purpose. Even the clucking of chickens at the doorway seemed part of the harmony. Neighbors sometimes passed by, peeking in with curiosity. They saw not chaos, but discipline. Each child listened, each helped another. Amina's home had become a place where patience grew like seeds in fertile soil. Though she lacked books and proper tools, she gave her children something greater, belief in themselves. She told them, "Your future is bigger than this house. One day, you will carry me forward with your strength and your learning." And the children nodded, their eyes shining in the candlelight. Life was never easy, and the rains made it harder. When the monsoon came, the paths turned to mud, and the roof of Amina's home leaked with every storm. Yet she never stopped moving. With her shawl wrapped around the youngest twins, she walked barefoot through the rain, her steps steady. The older children followed closely, balancing baskets of food and firewood on their heads. Their faces were wet, but their eyes were firm. Together, they moved like a single force, weathering the storm. Villagers watched from under their shelters. They saw the woman who once seemed fragile, now stronger than the earth itself. Her children no longer looked like burdens. They looked like soldiers of survival, trained by hardship and unity. When they reached home, soaked to the bone, they laughed together, for even in the hardest storm, they had each other, and that was enough. As the years rolled on, Amina's children grew taller, their shoulders broader, their voices deeper. They began to take on skills that kept the family alive. At night, the older twins sat with their mother, weaving baskets or repairing tools. Their hands were steady, their eyes focused. The younger twins sat close, watching with curiosity, waiting for their turn to learn. Amina guided each movement patiently, her voice calm, her instructions clear. She knew that one day, she would not have the strength to do it all. Her children had to be ready. The lantern cast a golden glow over their faces, and for a moment, the house looked brighter than it ever had. Laughter mixed with work, stories filled the air, and every corner of the room carried warmth. This was the life Amina had built, without the man who abandoned her. Her children were her legacy, her proof that strength is not measured by wealth or comfort, but by love and persistence. By the time the eldest twins reached 16, the family had found a new rhythm. They were no longer just children. They were workers, learners, and dreamers. At the village market, they sold baskets woven by their own hands, pots shaped from village clay, and vegetables they grew in their small patch of land. Customers came, not only for the goods, but for the sight of so many siblings working as one. They moved quickly, spoke politely, and handled money with care. Some people whispered, "These are Amina's children, the ones abandoned by their father." But the whispers had changed. They carried respect now. Amina stood behind her children, with quiet pride. She no longer felt the sting of loneliness when she remembered Rashid. She had built something far greater than what he had left behind. In the faces of her children, she saw not the shame of abandonment, but the triumph of survival. Evenings became Amina's favorite time. When the day's work was done, her children returned home carrying food, stories, and laughter. They sat together, their knees brushing, their bowls of rice shared across the crowded space. It was never a meal of luxury, but it was always a meal of unity. The older twins teased the younger ones, and the younger ones clung to their elder siblings for protection. Amina watched it all with a heart full of peace. Her hair had begun to turn grey. Her hands were lined and rough, but her spirit was alive. The emptiness she once felt had long been replaced by fullness, so vast it spilled from her smile. Eat well, she said softly. Tomorrow will need your strength. Her words were not just about food, they were about life, about the journey. They had all walked together. Around that dinner, Amina felt the reward of 20 years of sacrifice. Time moved forward, carrying her children into adulthood. By dawn, some worked the fields, planting seeds with skilled hands. Others climbed onto the roof, fixing leaks that had troubled them for years. The sound of hammers and laughter echoed through the air. Amina sat on a wooden stool, wrapped in her old shawl. She was no longer the one carrying buckets or climbing ladders. She did not need to. Her children had become her arms, her strength, her second life. For so long, she had been afraid of failing them. Yet as the sun rose higher, she realized she had succeeded in ways she never imagined. Her children had grown into men and women who knew work, respect, and kindness. Asterisk, she whispered a prayer of gratitude, not for riches or recognition, but for the simple sight before her eyes, a family standing tall, building their own future. 20 years had passed since that night when Rashid left. The children who once clung to Amina's dress now stood tall beside her. Some studied at schools in nearby towns, others worked trades in the village, and all carried themselves with dignity. Asterisk, at a village gathering, people whispered again, but this time, the whispers were filled with awe. "These are her children," they said. 17 pairs of twins, raised without a father. Look at them now. Asterisk, Amina stood in front of them, her face lined with years of toil, her back bent slightly with age. Yet her presence filled the space with quiet strength. Her children surrounded her like a wall of protection, their eyes steady, their voices respectful. Asterisk, the shame that once chased her steps had been replaced with honor. What was once a burden had become her greatest pride. In that moment, Amina knew she had written a story that no one could erase. Asterisk, one evening, Amina sat quietly by the fire when her children returned, but they carried more than food that night. In their hands were gifts. One laid a pair of new shoes at her feet, another placed folded fabric in her lap, and another handed her a bag of rice. Asterisk, Amina looked at the gifts, then at the faces of her children, her eyes filled with tears. She had spent years giving everything, never asking for anything in return. Now, the love she had poured into them flowed back to her, strong and certain. Asterisk, her children knelt beside her, their hands touching hers. "Mother," they said softly, "you gave us everything. Now it is our turn." Asterisk, for the first time in many years, Amina allowed her tears to fall freely, not from sorrow, but from joy too deep to contain. She had lived to see her sacrifices blossom into gratitude. Asterisk, as twilight fell, Amina sat beneath a tree outside her home. The air was cool, and the sky glowed with fading light. She watched as her children walked down the path in groups, some heading toward work, others toward study. Asterisk, her heart swelled with quiet pride. She had raised not just many children, but good ones. They were not lost to the world. They had direction, purpose, and compassion. Asterisk, she remembered the night she thought she had lost everything. The night Rashid turned his back and left her with newborns in her arms. At that time, she believed her life was broken. But now, watching her children's figures move steadily into the distance, she knew she had never been abandoned at all. Asterisk, her children had been her companions, her strength, her life. She whispered softly to the evening air, "I was never alone." Asterisk, 2 decades had reshaped everything. The woman who once wept alone with 2 newborns now sat surrounded by 34 grown children. Her silver hair glistened in the sunlight, her face marked by lines of both struggle and triumph. Asterisk, her children stood proudly around her. Some wore work clothes, others formal attire, but all carried the same warmth in their eyes. They leaned close, their hands resting on her shoulders, their presence wrapping around her like armor. Asterisk, neighbors gathered to witness the sight. They whispered again, but this time with admiration. "Look at her," they said, "a mother who raised 17 pairs of twins by herself. Look at what they have become." Asterisk, Amina's heart was full. She had once feared being forgotten, abandoned, or crushed under the weight of her fate. Instead, she had been lifted higher than she ever dreamed, by the very children she thought she could not raise. Asterisk, she looked at them, her voice steady though her eyes were wet. "You are my strength, you are my story, and you are my victory." Asterisk, and in that moment, surrounded by her family, Amina knew she had truly won.